Good morning. Welcome to Exploring Economic Development with MEDC. My name is Meredith Harris, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to episode 43 of Exploring Economic Development with MEDC. We have a great guest this morning. We're going to be talking about public transit. We have Jim Nee from the MWRTA. Jill Morin, good morning.
Hi, good
How are you?
morning. It's a little funny doing this every other month.
I know.
I think it was the right move with a bunch of the other projects that we're working on, but I'm used to
I miss you.
I miss you too.
I know.
And I miss our live streaming viewers. Hello on YouTube, Facebook, WMCT TV.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, we're excited. We're going to be talking a little bit about transit this morning, public transit in particular, how to get from point A to point B in the city of Marlborough and across the MetroWest region.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our last episode 43, which can be found on all streaming platforms, including podcasts.
42, episode 42. Yeah.
42.
Today's
Or
43.
43.
Yep.
42.
Was Mayor Christian Dumas.
Yep.
Which feels like forever ago.
I know.
Yeah, but we had the mayor on for our last episode. It was in his first 60 days to talk about how things were going, getting settled, priorities for the future, things we were going to be working on. So that was really fun and exciting.
Yeah.
We look forward to having him back midterm to talk about how things are going.
Absolutely. And so if you're watching us live right now, you can leave us comments right down there in the chat. We'll be able to see those and potentially integrate them into the show. So if you have questions for our guest, for us here at
Anytime.
the MEDC, let us know. And if you have ideas for future episodes, you can also let us know by contacting us on the phone number or email address below.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, we ready?
I think we're ready.
All right, let's introduce our guest for this morning. Drum roll, please. Jim, welcome. Good morning.
Hi, Meredith. Thank you so much for having me.
How are you?
I am wonderful.
You're good. We're so excited to have you this morning.
Well, I appreciate you having me. I mean, I love talking about public transportation, and Marlborough is just such an important community to the region that when you agreed to have me on, I was like, this is amazing. This is the perfect opportunity to talk about Marlborough and public transportation.
And you watch the podcast.
I do.
I love that.
I am an avid watcher of as much local media as possible.
That's awesome.
It's really important. You really have to have your finger on the pulse of communities and regions when you work in them, especially when you're doing it in public service of some kind.
Right.
So you can't be everywhere all at once, but you can kind of get a feel for what's going on.
Yeah, right. And so this is I don't want to say your second time because it's probably more than twice, but you were in Marlborough not that long ago with our new mayor.
I was.
Taking a ride on public transit. Is that correct?
That is correct. We were on the Route 7C, which runs sort of east-west in Marlborough on Route 20.
Okay.
It kind of goes not all the way to one edge of Marlborough to the other, but pretty much almost the full duration. Yeah. It's quite a long route. It goes to the Solomon Pond Mall. It's here downtown. It goes as far east as I think the Wayside Inn.
Okay.
And yeah, that's what we were riding. We also got a chance to try out our microtransit program from the mall. That was great. But getting to meet the mayor over the past couple of months, had a few conversations with him. It's clear that this administration is really interested in public transportation and making sure that we're really serving the people of Marlborough the best that we can.
And you guys got to wear like yellow vests, and it was a rainy day. It was super cool, right? I think we have some pictures that are up on the screen showing what you guys were up to that day. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, no, the neon yellow safety vest is sort of a staple of the industry.
Yeah,
and I wear them every day at work. I like to set the example. Sometimes people don't like wearing their safety vests, so I like to say if the administrator can wear it, then I'm sure everyone else can too.
Everybody can wear it.
So then I sometimes forget to take it off for meetings, or if you're having a meeting that's involving vehicles, sometimes it's worth it to have it on just to be a little extra careful.
It's pretty cool too. You look pretty good, right?
You can't miss me.
That's right.
The joke I like to tell is with that neon vest on, I am usually the tallest, the whitest, and the brightest person around. So if anyone does ever hit me with a bus, I know they meant to.
They meant to. That's great. We're off to a good start. I love it. All right, so we've already talked a little bit about the 7C. I love that. But before we get too much more into the service and things like that, Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself. You were just telling Jill and I before we went on about your background, how you got started in the industry. I just find it really interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about you and how you got into the transportation industry?
Absolutely. I absolutely have loved public transportation for almost exactly 22 years. Which is funny because I'm about 40 years old. So you'd think, oh, well, didn't you fall in love with it when you were a child? No, I actually ended up falling in love with it when I went to UMass Amherst out in Western Mass. Went there as an undergraduate student And when I came on campus as a freshman, I said, what's the highest paying job on campus? I was always
smart.
Yeah.
That was a smart thing to do.
I always, when I was in high school, I would work, I'd go to the local hiring agency and say, what's the highest paying job in town? I worked in some factories, a tractor factory. I worked in a manufacturing factory, a paper factory, all as like a 16, 17-year-old, because they were the highest paying jobs I could get. So did the same thing when I went to college.
I love it.
And the highest paying job was being a CDL bus driver for UMass Amherst, or for UMass Transit at UMass Amherst, which is one of the 3 garages for the PVTA. The PVTA is one of the 15 regional transit authorities in Massachusetts. It's the largest one in the state. Funny enough, when I started there, MetroWest Regional Transit Authority didn't exist, and there wasn't any laws that would allow for it to exist.
Wow.
So since that time, the laws have changed, and the MWRTA was formed. And here we are 22 years later.
All right, so now I got to ask you, for those that are watching that don't know what the regional transit authorities are, what are the regional transit authorities?
So there are long answers and short answers. I'll start with the short answer. That way, as I start to go into the long answer, you can feel free to cut me off on that. So the short answer is the regional transit authorities, there's 15 of them throughout the state, and they're really public transportation throughout the entire state, everything that isn't the T.
Okay.
So that's the short answer. The longer answer is they are regionalized areas, usually centered around 1 or 2 sort of high population or dense areas. In this case, it's sort of Marlborough and Framingham and MetroWest. And they sort of operate hub and spoke or other modes of public transportation that are more localized. And they're not really focused necessarily directly on Boston, but they focus on these local communities. But then they also, depending on where they're located throughout the state, where we're located, we're able to do this as well. You also look at how can you connect to other modes of transportation, like the commuter rail.
Okay. So, I mean, that the MBTA communities, like that's a thing a lot of people are talking about these days, adjacent communities. So you're talking about trying to really connect all of those different communities in different ways, right? Absolutely.
So you're really looking for a few different ways of connecting people. And that's really what public transit is you're connecting people where they live to where they need to go. And so you're looking to do that on a local level. So someone who lives in Marlborough who needs to go to the pharmacy or the grocery store in Marlborough, you want to make that local connection. But then you also want to connect someone who, maybe works 9 to 5 in Boston. How do you get them there?
Right.
So it's sort of, you want to do both.
And so I don't want to jump ahead. We've got all kinds of questions for you, but I think you're touching upon already why it's important from an economic development perspective for us to be clued in with you and what you guys have going on, because really what we're looking to do from that workforce development perspective is making sure that people can actually get to the jobs that we're providing here in Marlborough. So it's great to be able to attract these big companies and have them here in your community, but if people can't get to them, then what's the point, right? So it's a piece of that puzzle of making sure the folks that can't drive themselves to and from work, that they have other options and are able to get to the jobs that we're bringing in. So we can get to that a little bit more later, but I think you're already touching on it, which is really great from an economic development perspective. So we're talking about the regional transit authorities. Can you talk a little bit more specifically about the MWRTA? I know you said it hasn't actually existed that long, so to speak, but can you give us a little bit of history on the MWRTA in particular?
Absolutely. So some of the history of the MWRTA, there's a fantastic story that our Senate president likes to relay about public transit. She recalls seeing a political cartoon of like a skeleton waiting on a bench. And the sign says something to the effect of waiting for a bus in MetroWest or waiting for a bus in Framingham. And I never actually saw the cartoon, but she relays this story when she talks about sort of the founding of the MetroWest RTA, and it's a fantastic story. And she thought about that for a while when she was sort of junior in the Senate. And so she worked with the local communities, Ashland, Framingham, some of the other surrounding communities, and said, what do we need to do at the state level to allow public transit to sort of exist in Metro West? Because it's traditionally an area that, not that it was forgotten by the T, but sort of the T provided commuter rail, and that was sort of the end of it.
That's that whole last mile, right?
Yeah. So they provided the heavy duty rail into Boston, but what if someone needs to go somewhere else other than Boston? Or what if they need to get to that commuter rail and it's too far to walk?
And so that just, I want to explain that buzzword I just used, because some people that might not understand, but so the last mile gap, what we mean by that is if somebody, so say you can get from Boston, you get on at South Station or North Station, and you can get all the way to Southborough or Westborough, but then you're stuck there.
Yeah.
So there's no way to connect that connect the last mile, which would be from one of those train stations to Marlborough.
Absolutely. That is a spot on way of putting it. So
perfect. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but so you said they're looking at how do we connect that last mile? How do we figure that out?
Yeah. And it's for sort of that main mode, like on a heavy duty rail, but then so it's last mile for that, but it's also first and last mile within the system itself. Like I said, the people who want to stay within Marlborough and go somewhere that they need to go.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. To the grocery store or to the pharmacy or whatever it may be. Yep. Right. 495 partnership, I think, was a big part of that conversation back then, right? Shout out to our friend Jason over there.
Jason's the best.
He is the best.
Could you ask for a better advocate?
It was beyond his time, before his time, but he's really doing a lot of work these days to continue that advocacy. So that's a good thing.
So yeah, so groups like the 495 Business Council, but definitely spearheaded by now Senate President Spilka. Legislation was passed, I believe, 2006, which basically said if you have a community that's part of the MBTA, but the MBTA isn't serving it with buses and vans, those communities can join together and form a new RTA.
That's awesome.
Or add themselves to another RTA. So MetroWest kind of came together and said, well, we have the rail, but we don't have anything else, so let's form an RTA.
Okay.
So it was formed, I believe, in 2007, began operations in 2008. So we're right around our sweet 16th birthday right now.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. No, and it's a service that I think is highly utilized in the community. And so we talked a little bit about the 7C, but can you talk us through what does MWRTA in Marlborough, what does it look like? So there's that service that goes from one side to the other side, but there's a couple of other things going on too, right?
There absolutely is. Before I get into that, I got to start off by saying what we are today is not what we're going to be tomorrow.
Okay.
We are working on this.
I love that.
I'll happily go over where we are today, but know that there are changes that coming and for the better.
So people should be excited.
Yes. Okay, this is definitely an exciting time.
Love that.
So there's several routes. We talked about the 7C, sort of east-west. North-south, there's not necessarily something that focuses north-south between all the different communities sort of along that 85 or 495 corridor. But we do have a north-south route that runs between Marlborough to Framingham. And it's on 85 for a little bit. I believe it crosses over near 30 into 9. It goes by Framingham State and then goes down to
I think it comes right into our downtown.
Yeah.
Right.
And then it basically connects downtown Framingham to downtown Marlborough.
Right.
And that's definitely a connection that some people seem to like, but it's not the only connection that needs to be made. And when you combine those two routes, those are the bulk of the public transit for fixed routes in Marlborough. There's another route called the 15. It operates primarily in Hudson, but it connects also to downtown Marlborough. So if you're in Marlborough, especially near the downtown area, you can connect up to Hudson and a number of the stuff they have going on there. And another program that we have that we just started piloting recently was grant funded through our local delegation, or actually not, is it grant funded or earmarked? I forget. I'll have to look that up.
They funded it, which was very exciting.
It, and they called it out, but it was Kate Hogan. She was wonderful. She came in and said, let's make sure we get some micro transit. We can talk about micro transit in a bit, but let's try that in Hudson a little bit. But we said, well, if we're doing Hudson, it should be parts of Marlborough too, because Hudson and Marlborough
we appreciate that.
kind of work together.
Yeah.
So that connects to downtown Marlborough. It connects to the Solomon Pond Mall and then other parts of Hudson as well.
All right. So what is micro transit? What does that mean?
So there's, again, short answers and long answers. The short answer is it's the public transit, not equivalent, but sort of answer to TNC companies, which are Uber and Lyft.
Okay.
So transportation network companies, Uber and Lyft kind of changed the dynamic, sort of appified transportation in the past 10 or 15 years. And public transportation is historically very slow to respond to any changing technologies.
Sure.
Some industries are, some industries aren't. Public transit is typically slower. So public transit really didn't want to fall behind on this. So 5-6 years ago, a lot of agencies said, how do we do something similar to that? We can't do the exact same thing. We don't have the resources.
Nor do you want to, right?
Yeah, you really don't. So if you look at an Uber or Lyft and you sort of geographically constrain it and you resource constrain it, so you say, oh, it only operates in Hudson and Marlborough, versus if you get on an Uber or Lyft and you book it in, say, Marlborough downtown, you could technically take that to Logan Airport.
Right.
Actually, if you wanted to, you could take it to Buffalo, New York, if you're willing to pay $500.
If you're willing to pay,
yeah,
right.
$500. Ours, there is that geographical boundary.
Okay.
So that's one of the main differences. Otherwise, you book it on an app just like you would an Uber or Lyft. Usually the average wait time is about 10 to 15 minutes to get picked up.
Okay.
It's open to
not
the general public. Yeah. The trip is only $2.
Wow.
So that is...
No matter where you're going in that
no
area.
matter where you're going.
Wait, say that one more time.
$2.
$2.
Yes. And
Awesome.
average wait time of 10 to 15 minutes.
Wow.
Now, again, it's geographically constrained.
Right.
It's time constrained. It operates from a certain hour in the morning to a certain hour in the afternoon. So there are limitations, and it's not the exact same as Uber and Lyft. One of the great benefits for it, though, is unlike Uber and Lyft, with Uber and Lyft, you have to book it on your app on your phone. And we have that. Not quite as fancy as Uber and Lyft, but it's a very good app.
That's okay.
But the other option is, too, you can call our call center. So say you're the type of person who says, I don't like smartphones. I don't like apps.
Sure.
I don't want anything to do with that.
Right.
You can give our call center a call and they'll book it for you.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really good resource too for the seniors or,
Yep.
you know, folks that might not have access to a smartphone or something like that. That's really, really cool. So
Yeah.
my next question for you is going to be, how do people find more information about that service or about the existing fixed routes that you guys have in the community?
Absolutely. So MWRTA.com. That's where all of our information is.
Okay.
There's information on our fixed routes. There's information on our dial-a-ride programs, our microtransit. Our particular microtransit program, we have it branded Catch Connect. It's part of a branding exercise that took place about 5 years ago. Our smart card, which is basically what a Charlie card is. We also use the Catch marketing on that. So we have a Catch card. Catch Connect is the microtransit.
Okay.
So the word catch shows up a lot.
So, all right. So you segued right into that. So what is a typical experience like? So if I'm waiting at the bus stop downtown and the MWRTA bus pulls up,
Yep.
What happens next? What is it like? You know, when you're in Boston, it's the Charlie card.
Yep.
So obviously here it's a Catch card.
Yep.
But walk us through that. What does that look like?
Sure. So it depends on the mode. If we're talking about fixed route, we're kind of thinking about like buses in downtown Boston and sort of our fixed routes in the area. It's very similar. You walk onto the vehicle and you'll have a cash box and sort of a tap area. It says tap your card here. And you can either put the dollar and change fare into the cash box, or you can tap your card.
How do you get a card?
So every single driver and every single bus in our system, they have a stockpile of the cards on board. So if you don't have one, upon boarding, you can say, hey, can I get a Catch card? And the driver should hand you one.
Okay.
We also have them stored at our hub. If someone needs assistance getting them or signing up for one, you can call our call center or our main information line, and people can help you out. But basically our hubs or any fixed route vehicle.
And so you can reload those cards.
Yep. You can reload it any way you please. You can use a credit card. So you can do it directly on the app that we have.
Oh, wow.
It's called the Catch app. Like I said, the Catch
Lots
word.
of catch going
Yes,
on.
it does. The MWRTA Catch app. So you can refill it directly on that app. You can give us a call and give us a credit card over the phone. If you want to mail in a check, that's fine too. Some people prefer cash. We prefer if it's cash that we sort of do it in person, so a person would come down to our hub. But there are other ways of doing that as well. We don't want to limit the ways that we accept payments because we really want to make sure that everyone, regardless of your circumstance, some people are unbanked. So we'd love to, we prefer the credit cards and those are easiest. And if you do it on the app, that's easiest. But we want to make sure it's accessible to anyone.
So there's a lot of
That's
ways
wonderful.
to be able to access. That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. So we're talking about money. Can you walk us through a little bit? Some people might be wondering, like, how is this funded? Where does the funding come from?
Yeah.
It's kind of state. There's, each community is playing a part. So what does that look like?
So it's really funded from three main sources, but there's a fourth that I like adding in there. So from the highest level, the feds are involved heavily.
Okay.
Federal government is involved through both formula funding and discretionary grant programs. Their piece of this pie is typically, for most agencies and for us, and there are exceptions, they're really focused on the capital investment. They really say, how can we invest in your rolling stock, the buses you have on the road, the buildings that you have? Now, other people help out with that too, but the feds really focus on that. They focus on capital investment and they sort of focus on regulation. The state level is really focused on the operating funds. What does it take to actually fill the vehicle up with fuel? What does it take to pay the driver?
Sure.
Keep the lights on? The state really focuses on that. And they partner with the localities. So the localities, whether it's a place like Marlborough or any of the other towns, they get assessed just like any other service in the state. They get assessed. It shows up on something called their cherry sheet. And depending on how much service they have, that locality will pay more or less.
Okay.
And so the localities join with the state to pay for the operating. And if a locality wants a lot of service, they'd pay a little bit more. If they want less, they pay a little bit less. And the fourth funding mechanism after the localities is the fares. So direct revenue. We try to collect a lot of direct revenue where we can from public-private partnerships, but the most common form is fares.
Okay.
So
that's people using those catch cards.
Yep.
The catch cards.
Absolutely.
All right. So speaking of that, there's a program that you guys are currently running.
Yep.
Free ridership. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So the RTAs, funded through the legislature and authorized and administered by MassDOT, have a fare-free program. This started a number of years ago where they did very tiny small pilots like, hey, let's do a fare-free program for a couple of days or a weekend. And then it was last year or the year before, they did a little bit of a larger one where they said, let's give the RTAs funding to try that out for a couple weeks or a month. And we called that the Try Transit program, give people the opportunity to try transit. The 15 RTAs, we all kind of joined together and said, instead of competing against each other, let's do a unified marketing campaign, call it Try Transit, and we'll all apply together.
I love that.
And everyone kind of had their own flavor on what they would do individually, but it was understood that it was a joint program generally to provide some sort of fare-free service. This past year, the legislature funded it at an even higher level, thanks to the fair share funding.
That's great.
And it's probably enough for somewhere, it depends on the transit agency, but between about 3 to 6 months worth of fare-free services. Here in MetroWest, and like I said, everyone kind of chose their own adventure on how they'd do fare-free. What we chose to do was anyone who uses one of our Charlie cards, that is preloaded and you are free during the duration of the program. If you call in for a dial-a-ride or an ADA ride, that's free as well. And the only exception was our Catch Connect. Because Catch Connect is demand response,
sure, because
it's open to the general public, it's more of a premium service. We were told to focus sort of on equity considerations with the fare-free money, much like what the MBTA is going through right now.
Yep.
So what we said was, if we can control for equity as best we can, where could we do that? Well, we could definitely identify that ADA, fixed route, it's people typically in a lower economic level.
Sure.
Catch Connect, many people are in a lower economic level as well, but there's some people who are a little bit higher up.
Sure.
So if we're going to use our money wisely and have those considerations, that's how we chose to do it here. Not every RTA did it the exact same. Some people have longer programs, shorter programs, more blanket programs. Some people have very narrow and confined programs. We're trying something out. We're trying to see if we can get this smart card adopted at a higher level in our system.
Okay.
We don't know which way the winds are going to turn on fare free, whether it's at the state or federal level. So we figure, there's the potential long term that maybe the state or the feds say fare free is the way to go on public transit. If that happens, we really won't need a smart card.
Yeah.
But if they don't say that, smart card's probably the way to go.
Probably the way to go.
So we want to make sure that we've sort of increased adoption of that as best we can. So that way we're ready for either future.
And so you guys just extended the program.
We did.
You did. Okay.
It was supposed to run through the end of March, and we were able to run it through the end of June.
That's great. That's great. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit, talk more kind of just about transportation in general. Now, you were recently recognized as a 40 under 40 for your work in transportation, which is awesome. Congratulations for that. But you had a quote in the article that we just thought was really cool. And you talked about how in most of your career, I think you said 15 out of the 20 years that you've actually been a public transit rider yourself.
That's correct.
That's so cool. And so I really would love to hear a little bit more on how that has help shape your perspective, how it helps your work every day, being somebody that's utilizing the service that you're providing.
So day one, week one, year one, that was out of the fact that I was a poor college student. How do I get around? Well, I'm driving these buses. I can certainly be a rider on these buses as well. Then as I started to sort of move up through the program, I became a dispatcher and a supervisor, eventually a manager. Went out into the world and, obviously the past 22 years I've been working in public transit. Every step along the way, it became clear that not only is using public transit often convenient or good for the environment, good for your area, but it's also good to kind of keep in touch. After about my 8th year in the business, I never drove a bus again. I still maintain my CDL license just in case that day comes.
In case you need to.
Just in case. But I haven't driven in the past 14-ish years. So if you're not out there driving, if you're not there on the front lines with those drivers, if you're not out there with those passengers, you can really lose touch. And there's some industries and there's some positions where people really go off into their ivory towers and they're making policy decisions or decisions for the ridership. And
they don't understand it.
They don't understand it. And maybe they did understand it 20 years ago, but they maybe don't understand today. So I make it a point to try to be a rider of my system and other systems around me. Unfortunately, it's only 15 out of 22 years. In the last 18 months, I haven't been able to be as much of a rider as I'd like to be, though I am working very actively to figure out my transportation options to improve that. And part of that is improving the system that I work in. So,
well, you got on the bus with Mayor Christian, so that's awesome. Right?
It was a great ride.
It was a great ride.
Yeah.
All right. So you just said too, they may have been in touch 20 years ago. So in your career, when you've been doing this, what has changed? What are the different trends? I mean, I know you talked a little bit about technology and how that changes, but what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in your career in doing this over the years?
Sure. So there's been a lot of changes. One of the biggest ones is the expectation on real-time data, things that we refer to as AVL. It's basically GPS data. Where's the bus right this moment?
Right.
If you go back 20 years, you had a timetable that was printed on a piece of paper. You didn't have a phone number to call. There typically wasn't. So you would rely that piece of paper with that printed time was correct. You'd stand at a spot and you hope your bus came. Usually it did, not always.
Right.
So now with smartphones, with new GPS technology, you can pull up on your phone or on a display somewhere. You can see, where is that bus right now? And you can see, oh, it's caught in traffic. Oh, it's going to be here in 5 minutes. It's not that it's not coming and I'm guessing. I can actually see now where that bus is.
I never even thought about that. But like even in the subway, like in Boston, they have the signs now where it says like 5 minutes arriving. Or I never really thought about the fact that is probably a very new technology in the last 10 years or so.
I mean, the base of the technology is a little bit older. I mean, you could probably get GPSs 25, 30 years ago, but actually using that and not just using it for yourself, but then providing it as a public feed or informing other pieces of information or other displays, that's relatively new. And when I say relatively, 15, 20 years, it was really sort of in a beta form about 15 or so years ago. But now there's an expectation that it's out there. If you're not giving live information on where your buses are, then you're a dinosaur.
Yeah, so people are angry.
Yeah, they want to know, because public transportation suffers from what everyone suffers from in a car. That's traffic or road conditions. So if you have a bus that's scheduled to be there, say at noon, and it's going to show up at 12:07 because it got caught in some terrible traffic jam, well, the person really wants to know. They don't want to be guessing where the bus is. They want to be standing on.
Missed it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Did you miss it? Did something happen? If you see the GPS or the AVL feed, you can know. Oh yeah, it's going to come. Yeah,
exactly. Or I need to call that on-demand service, right? Catch Connect, right?
Exactly. So that's a big change.
That is a big change.
Yeah.
Are there any others? I didn't mean to jump in. That's a pretty big one. I was going to ask you, I was going to pivot towards, have you seen a change in ridership or anything post-COVID in particular? I know COVID kind of changed the way we do a lot of things. Have you seen anything from a rider perspective or anything else that has really changed since COVID? Yeah.
So COVID did a number on every industry across the country and the world. So the transportation, we weren't accepted. At the depths of COVID during the lockdown period, most public transit agencies were probably providing about 5 to 15% the normal number of trips. So most public transit agencies went low. They're vital resources, though, for people who are usually frontline workers, essential workers. So public transit, for the most part, couldn't shut down. We were thankful that throughout our industry in most areas, public transit workers were often some of the first to get a vaccine so they could continue their work. But coming out of the lockdowns and sort of optimistically looking to the future, ridership has continued to rebound here in MetroWest and throughout the state pretty much since that point. I wouldn't say we're at exactly pre-pandemic levels for ridership, but we're actually trending towards there shortly. If you kind of control for a few different discretionary grant programs that we ran prior to COVID, we're actually just about at pre-pandemic levels, probably about 5 to 10% left to go. But we also have some other programs that we're starting up. So we're hopeful that with some of the work we're going to do on our system, we're not just shooting for pre-pandemic levels. Pre-pandemic, the RTA was brand new. It was barely a decade old. We have a long way to go. Our trajectory is up, up, up. And I'm really shooting for, and my staff will probably hate me for saying this, somewhere between 250 and 300% ridership growth over the next 5-6 years.
I love it.
Those numbers, anything short of that, I don't think we're doing enough service for our community. And it doesn't mean it translates to 300% 300% more funding. Most of this, in most cases, is we just need to do things more effectively. We need to work with our partners. We need to look at what we're providing in the community and say, how do we most effectively serve the community? So,
I was going to say, I mean, we've been having conversations too, internally about how do we work together, and so that's where I want to kind of delve into this economic development perspective. Obviously, public transportation, you're moving residents from one place in the community to another, and that's a huge part of what you guys do.
Yep.
The lens that we wear is kind of this workforce development, and how do we make sure that we're continuing to serve the employers in the community, and make sure the biggest thing that we hear when we talk to companies in the community is, we'll say, how do we keep you here? How do we retain you in the community? And it always comes back to the employees, whether that's providing more restaurants and more, parks and fields and things for people to do. But it always comes back to if the employees are happy, 9 times out of 10, the company is going to stick around. And a huge piece of that is if the employees can't get to where they're working, they're probably not very happy, right? So we've thought, kind of uniquely over the last 5, 6, 7 years, I guess, at this point, about how do we do that. And we implemented a program back in 2019, which was the Marlborough Commuter Shuttle, which has been very successful. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. But we've been talking kind of long term about how do we maybe shift some of those conversations to being more public transit. Is that something we should be doing? The ridership is really good. But what are your thoughts from an economic development standpoint on how important transportation, public transportation in particular, is for a community to continue to be economically healthy?
I think it's really important. Public transportation, or transportation in general, it's not something you could take in a vacuum. And I don't think economic development could be taken in a vacuum either. When I think about how these things are interrelated, I think about housing, I think about economic development, I think about how these communities are stitched together. And transportation is sort of the fiber that keeps things together. If we existed in a vacuum, no one would ride our service. Why are they riding our service? Because they're going home, because they're going to work, because they're going to the store. So that economic development is vital. And where businesses are, where the store is, where someone lives, those questions are a constant consideration in everything that we do. So, public transit is sort of that fiber that kind of binds those things together for people. And it's not the answer for everyone. We know that public transportation won't work for everyone in all cases, but we want to make sure that it provides a level of access that if someone does need to get somewhere and they're transportation dependent, which means they don't have access to a car, or maybe they're a large household and the household only has one car, or maybe they're unable to drive a car. We want to make sure that what's being provided in the area can help that person get to where they need to go. And they don't get in a situation where they really can't leave their home, or they can't go to a job. They miss out on opportunities.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and we want to continue to make sure people can travel around the community, spend their dollars at the places downtown, or whether it's at the mall or all these different places. So, it's really important to be able to move people around throughout the community. What do you see as whether it's challenges or opportunities that riders face, when they are looking at public transportation?
So there's a number of challenges in public transportation. It's not as convenient and it's not as free as having your own car. If I, in this interview, I'm all done here and I want to go drive to Timbuktu, I can do that in my car right now. If I wanted to do that in public transit, I need to look up the schedule. I need to figure out how many transfers, what time does the bus arrive, and maybe it's a 45-minute drive in my car, and that's a 2.5-hour ride in public transportation. That's not as free. That's not as convenient. So that sort of limitation on a person, it's a challenge, and we want to figure out how we provide services that are more direct. They go back and forth between the places that people really need to go to limit the number of transfers, to speed up that travel time, to really provide that convenience. And that's what we're looking at. We've done a pretty good job to date, but we have miles to go, proverbially.
So I want to talk about our shuttle a little bit more too. Is that a program that you see other are we unique in the sense that we're providing that kind of a service to our community?
So I would hesitate to say that you're not unique. Marlborough is wonderful and it's unique in many ways.
Right?
I would say that it is very akin to certain private corporation shuttles, or sometimes you'll have nonprofits. Actually, 7 years before I was in my current position, I ran a shuttle system in the Longwood medical area of Boston. And it was for this nonprofit that brought about 30 higher ed and hospital institutions together. Beth Israel, Harvard Medical School, Brigham and Women's. So we ran this shuttle system on behalf of them to kind of connect to the MBTA and to parking locations. And so private corporations or nonprofits working together to provide a shuttle or system of shuttles, it's not unique, but it's often done sort of by an individual company. So if you had an individual company, maybe they say, I'm going to provide my employee shuttle. The idea that a organization, whether it's the Economic Development Corporation or the city of Marlborough, coming in and saying, we want to do that and not have it, it's not public transportation, it's our thing here. It's a little bit unique.
Sure.
It's more typically public transportation, but it can work too. There's basically public-private partnerships and that sort of model. They can work, and it really depends on what the community needs and what they're being served by.
Right.
So it's a great shuttle. It's something that, it's similar to public transit. So it's the type of thing we could provide.
Yeah.
But I'd say what you guys have here is, it's very clear that you have a community that cares about economic development. You have leadership that cares about that, and making sure that people have those connections. It's a priority. It's a priority.
Yeah.
And so it's unique in that your community has prioritized it regardless of what was here. So,
and the cool part about our shuttle too is that the seniors are using it during the day.
Yeah.
So it's a commuter shuttle on either end of the day, but during the middle time frame, our seniors are utilizing it, which is really cool. But you often see, to your point, like Boston Scientific runs they have a shuttle that they've been running for years, and it's interesting to see all the different formats and the different ways that transportation comes to us. But you guys are providing such an amazing service to the community, and I look forward to kind of seeing how that evolves over time. And do you have any trends or anything that you want to share? Believe it or not, we're wrapping up on time here.
Oh, geez.
I know it goes by so quickly, but is there anything that we missed that you think, or things people should be excited about, or anything you think people need to know or be on the lookout for when it comes to the MWRTA or just transportation in general?
So there's a million trends. So since we don't have a million years to talk about, the one thing I will say is for the MWRTA in particular, and for this region and for Marlborough, what I'd say is be on the lookout for public engagement. Look at our website, look at our social media, look to the newsletters we put out. There's going to be a lot of public engagement that takes place over the next 2 years, because one of the key things we do a lot of planning. We decide, we have transportation experts in-house, we have planners. We decide, this is where it should go. And we'll work with local communities. We'll work with local leadership and say, where do you think public transit should go? And all those decisions are great. But then there's a kind of final piece in that process, which is that public engagement. We come up with these wonderful ideas, but does it actually work for the community? Does it work for the riders or the residents? And so that public engagement piece always takes place.
Critical.
If there's a minor tweak, we'll make minor tweaks without
Sure.
too much of that. If I want to add a little bit of extra service, usually people don't complain about new service.
Sure.
But if we take something away or adjust it, we want to make sure, and we're going to be doing a lot of adjusting, and it's going to be for the better, because we're going to make our buses more frequent. We're going to make them more direct. People right now often have to wait an hour or so between buses. We want to get that, especially in core communities like Marlborough. We want to get that down. Not an hour, maybe every 45 minutes, every 30 minutes. We really want to get it so it's easier for people to have those commutes. And as we make those adjustments, some of them might be big enough that we really need that public engagement to hear, are we making the right changes? So be on the lookout for that, especially in this region.
Well, I think that's really important too. I mean, your point earlier of, you can make decisions but if you're not using the service, or if you're not somebody that's affected by it, what's the point, right? So that's a great comment to put out to the residents of this community, that if you would like more service, or if you're currently a rider and you don't want something to change, or you think it should be tweaked, be able to provide that feedback. Or if you're not a rider, why not? And what would make you be a rider, or would you consider it, or something like that? I think that's really good feedback. And we'll make sure to link your website and all those. And if anybody who's watching would like to get in touch with Jim, I'm sure that you'd be happy for us to be able to put folks in touch and provide comments.
Jim@MWRTA.com. It's the simplest email there is. JIM@MWRTA.com. I am always available. Sometimes I'm stuck in meetings, so it might take me a little bit longer than I'd like to get back to you, but I respond to everyone. Also, if you have a specific thing that's a comment, a complaint, or a suggestion prior to some of that public outreach that we're doing, another very simple email is info@MWRTA.com.
I love that.
That's where we get most of our public comment, kind of in the interim between like meetings or things like that.
And if anyone sees you walking down the street with your yellow vest on, make sure to stop and say hello, right?
Always happy to chat. Always.
Awesome. We're out of time. So,
Okay.
Jim, thank you so much. This was awesome. I think a really great conversation. We probably could sit here and talk about transportation for many, many hours, but we appreciate your time this morning.
Meredith, I really appreciate the time. What you guys are doing here is quite wonderful. I'm really optimistic for the future of everything going on in Metro West and in Marlborough in particular.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Jill, I think that wraps up episode 43, my friend.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you to all of our viewers. We appreciate you tuning in. Until next time, have a wonderful Wednesday.